Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pinecker, and I'm very honored to have this guest on. This is actually the second time that I have Brian Hales on. The first time was, of course, when we had him on to have a panel discussion about Joseph Geisner's who edited the Writing Mormon History, which, by the way, the second volume will be coming out shortly. Maybe by the time this episode airs, it might even be out. But the second volume of Writing Mormon History from Signature Books will be coming out. But it was great to kind of revisit this book. It kind of got lost in the shuffle with COVID and everything like that. There's some really, really good authors, some really good stuff in this, and it's really fascinating about Mormon historians writing about Mormon history. And Brian, it was great to have you on that panel. I just want to welcome you to the program today. How are you doing today?
Thanks. No, I'm really grateful that you would let me come on with you, Steve. You have such a great channel, and it's a privilege.
So one of the reasons I asked Brian to come on is that recently Michelle Brady Stone, her channel has really been growing, and she's been posting a lot of things out there that's resonating with a lot of people and gaining a lot of traction. A lot of personal friends of mine are big fans of her. And I've always, this is the thing with Michelle, is that she's a part of that camp that denies that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy and also instituted it and actually fought it. And this is kind of the basis of and so that's their foundation of where they're coming from. Now, of course, historically speaking, folks, the RLDS, their official narrative was that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, and that, of course, was Emma Smith's. So that's where this idea comes. So this isn't a new idea. This is something that's been around for a very long time. But the overwhelming scholarly community, basically, there's the consensus is that Joseph Smith did indeed practice polygamy and did indeed institute it and did indeed write Section 132. So that's the scholarly consensus on this matter. Is that a good breakdown, Brian, just to kind of lay the groundwork for our conversation?
Yeah, that's great. There's for me, I'm somebody who's written 3 volumes on it. And so for me, it's just an automatic that Joseph did introduce it as part of the restoration that he performed. But there are a number of individuals, with Michelle Brady Stone being foremost at this point in time, declaring that either he didn't do it at all, or if he did it, he was wrong in doing so, something like that.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating to me because honestly, as an evangelical outsider, I I don't if he practiced polygamy, and I accept that he did, at least I accept the scholarly, just so people know my position regarding anything that I'm not too knowledgeable of is I just go with the scholarly consensus on this whole thing, and that's the position that I'm taking. However, I'm friends with Michelle, and I just want to let everybody know that I spoke with Michelle on the phone yesterday, and I did tell her that she's welcome to come on to respond to this. So I just want to let everybody know ahead of time that Michelle has been given the invitation to respond, whether with Brian, have a conversation with Brian, or she will just come and do a singular thing. And I want to be fair because, yeah, I'll reveal my bias, if you will, on this. I accept the scholarly consensus that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. And as an outsider, I don't have a problem with that because I tell people that actually kind of qualifies him as a scripture producer, because many of the scripture producers in our scriptures were also practiced the principle. So to me, that's not a disqualification for being a prophet or a producer of scripture. It actually kind of bolsters the argument in favor, if that makes any sense to any of you. So Brian, before we get started on this presentation, actually, Brian put together a slide presentation where he's going to respond to Michelle and some of the general claims of this movement. Before we get started, Brian, did you have anything you wanted to just add before we started?
No, maybe a little background on Michelle Brady Stone and I we've known each other for some time. I was on her podcast over a year ago, and we talked about some of the primary evidences that I thought supported that Joseph was involved, and tried to give a little overview of all of that. And then she wrote me, and honestly, I felt like saying, look, it's all in my volumes, my 3 volumes that were published in 2013. There have been criticisms of those, but nobody has said we left anything out. And so I still think that while there's a lot of talk right now, most of the issues, most of the primary documents are either quoted or referenced there in my volumes. And so I haven't been that much involved with it. My primary focus is on the origin of the Book of Mormon, and I have a book coming out with Gray Cofer Books on that sometime probably next year. But when you contacted me and I did a little research and I realized that Michelle now has over 17,000 subscribers to her YouTube channel. And that's even more than you have, Steve. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Okay. But that's remarkable. That's very, very impressive. And I
Very
thought, well,
impressive.
I don't want to get on the show here and go point for point. Here's what she said. Here's what Brian says. Here, yada, yada. That wouldn't be helpful. But I have two concerns that I'd love to share. And I really appreciate you letting me come on and talk about these.
Okay, well, let's get started. And so I'm going to interject and maybe ask a question or ask for a clarification as he's given this presentation. But I'm handing over the controls over to you, my friend.
Okay. All right. Well, feel free to jump in anytime. And I'm going to share my screen. I love the PowerPoint. And let's see, share that one. All right. Are you able to see concern number one?
Yes, we're loud and clear, my friend. We're good to go.
Okay, and I'm not sure that you really need to see this. In fact, maybe I'll toggle off of it here, but we're going to move off of it here in just a second. But I just don't understand what Michelle's objective or goal, her end game is. And I asked her this in some Facebook messages and stuff, and she wrote back a lot of words, but I never could identify, well, what exactly is she trying to accomplish with this? And yet I did watch her 2-year anniversary video that she posted. I think it's number 107. She posted a couple of weeks ago. And I was intrigued by a lot of the things that she had said there. And I want to just talk about some of those here, because in that video cast, she poses a question that seems to be an overriding question, at least for that particular video cast, but maybe something that would expand longer. So let me just put that here. Let's make sure you can hear this.
The fundamental question we need to ask and answer, and that this entire episode is dedicated to, is polygamy of God?
Okay, I'm going to toggle off of that because I always hate it when people freeze my face with some weird, more than normal weird look on it. So we'll go to my next slide here for just a minute. But what Michelle is asking is polygamy, could it be of God? And the reality is that within the context of church history and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this is a question that has been answered dozens, if not hundreds of times. And I pulled this quote from John Taylor. He was president of the church when he said it, but I really like the way it contextualizes plural marriage. He says, God has told us about our wives and our children being sealed to us that we might have a claim on them in eternity. He has revealed unto us the law of celestial marriage, associated with which is the principle of plural marriage. So here, and there's lots of different, there's a lot of ambiguity on whether plural marriage is a principle or a law or a commandment or whatever. But I love the way that it's described here, because the law of celestial marriage is eternal marriage. And then there's a practice and a principle called plural marriage. But you'll notice that John Taylor is ascribing this as coming from God. And I would point out that throughout our history, other church leaders and the church historians have verified that this is really the position, that plural marriage was practiced and that it came from God. This position has been reiterated in the Gospel Topic Essay, which came out, I think, in 2014. And I actually did help with that. I provided information at the very beginning when they were doing the writing. I didn't do any writing, but about 6 months before it was posted, they sent me a rough draft of it, and I made some comments, most of which they accepted. They were just small little ticky-tack things, but they did let me participate in creating this, and I was very pleased with it because there are paragraphs on all of the controversies, and though it's brief, I think it hits all of the primary concerns. And then, of course, we have saints, and I think I see this volume on your shelf behind you there, Steve. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the Joseph Smith Papers Project, which very fine, well-trained historians have gone through and again documented that Joseph was involved. So what we find here is Michelle is asking a question that, from my perspective, has been answered over and over and over by church leaders and church historians. But it's an answer that apparently doesn't work, at least for her. And if we look further into the podcast, what we find is that she gives her own answer to the question. And
so it is impossible to claim that polygamy is or ever could be any part of the gospel.
Okay, so here she's saying that it's impossible that plural marriage could ever be part of the gospel. and she's entitled to her opinion. Okay, I'm not saying she's not. But what I want to point out here, and I'll share the screen again here, is I want to just share a few of the quotations from the church leaders in the past. Here's Brigham Young. As for polygamy or any doctrine the Lord has revealed, so see, he's defining polygamy as coming from God. It is not for me to change. And then we have John Taylor saying, we have received the doctrine of plural marriage as a part of the gospel. I mean, here's a direct using the same language that Michelle was using. It is part of the gospel, according to John Taylor. Here's Wilford Woodruff. Joseph Smith, of course, taught that principle while in Nauvoo, and he not only taught it, but he practiced it also. Practiced it too. And then there's Lorenzo Snow. The principles of plural marriage were revealed for the benefit and exaltation of the children of men. And then lastly, there is a great deal said about our plural marriage by the outside world. It is a law of the gospel pertaining to the celestial kingdom, applicable to all gospel dispensations when commanded. And so, and you probably noticed that those were church presidents, Brigham Young through Joseph F. Smith. So I've just pulled one. I could have found dozens, if not hundreds more, from these individuals and from other church leaders, the 12, those that we in the church call prophets, seers, and revelators, who are saying that, yes, polygamy was revealed from God. And they would also add, if we looked a little closer, that it came through Joseph Smith. So we have Michelle in this podcast asking a question and answering it in a way that seems to reject or dismiss or ignore multiple statements that come from our church leaders.
And I want to emphasize here too, is that there are people who are part of this camp that don't believe that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy and maybe even fought it, who are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The difference is that Michelle is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it adds a different layer to this too, because as a member of this church, these are her prophets that are making these statements. Now, somebody who's outside of the group can just dismiss all of those statements, saying, well, that's, they're in on the cover up or whatever, however they want to approach it. But Michelle's place is in the church. So I think it's important to that why these comments would be relevant to the conversation vis-a-vis her work that she's doing.
Well, and in this podcast, and I was kind of surprised to see this, honestly, but she also has a couple of clips where she is actually very judgmental on our sitting apostles, one of whom is in the first presidency. I'm just going to introduce the clips. You can go back and watch it if you want to, but it's her willingness to portray our apostles, those that are living today, as being less than they ought to be, that I think is a surprising element of the video cast that she did a couple of weeks ago. Here's one excerpt. Oh, wait, let's see. Oh, hang on.
That's all right.
I need to share the screen first, right? So
yep. It's all good.
Right, here we go. Nope.
I got the videos up.
Our leaders, our apostles and prophets can't answer questions about it, but at best rely on apologists, which usually means female historians, like in this clip.
As you can imagine, we've received quite a few questions.
Now, I truncated it there. This is Elder Cook, and it's a question about polygamy. But the point is that Elder Cook's portrayed as being less than he ought to be. He's not answering questions that I think Michelle thinks he ought to be. Here's another example.
Sometimes we even hear them gently mock the heartache that women experience and tell us just not to worry our pretty little heads about it, but just know that God will make it all okay.
A letter I received some time ago introduces the subject of my talk.
Okay, so again, she accuses Elder Oaks of mocking the women, and again, she's entitled to her opinion. I'm not saying that she's not, but her willingness to put our sitting apostles up there and be critical of them is somewhat of a surprise to me. That's kind of a big deal. That's pretty aggressive. That's bold, if you will. That's a gutsy kind of a position to take. Let me share the screen for one more thing here. Let's see if we can.
But each of these claims, like so many other things in 132, is completely false.
Okay, so there she's talking about section 132 and about how it contains things that are completely false. Again, this is kind of bold, I think, to come on to her own video cast. You said she's still a member, and so she must value her membership. But in our church, usually to deny past presidents of the church or criticize or disagree with, maybe you'd see that publicly, not so much, but to carry this forward to even those that are presiding today is less common. And it kind of surprised me. And so it just brings us back to the question is what is her goal? What is the objective here? Because I don't get it. And I've asked her before, what is she trying to accomplish? Is she trying to tell us that Joseph didn't do it, and all these other prophets, seers, and revelators, these church leaders that we thought were telling us what God wanted, that they were all wrong about polygamy, but maybe they were right about everything else? And this brings me to one last slide here, if I can just share it. Whatever she might tell you when you give her the microphone, Stephen, is that I think that regardless of what she says, the resulting that I see is confusion. You've got her audience that are hearing her say, no, it's this way. And yet we look back over history and we have the highest authorities in the church disagreeing with her on this point. And I worry that the confusion that she's generating, and I really do think that she's responsible, could be undermining faith in our church leaders, both past and present. And so this is really my first concern is what is the point of this whole 132 problems channel and all of these how many she has? She has over 100 video casts. What is the end game here? I don't know. In your conversations, have you talked with her about that, or do you have a feel for what might be the objective here?
I think, Brian, actually, a lot of the conversations I have with people, I almost feel like a lot of people are hopping on YouTube and are actually, in one sense, I feel like they're documenting their faith journey. And faith journeys can take you down different avenues. And I don't know when and again, I'm not going to try to say, well, this is what she intended at the beginning, but I don't know if that when she first started this was her intent. I think she's documenting her journey as she does her research and gives her conclusions, and she's kind of giving like real-time updates about where she's at. And I think that's kind of, in one sense, I don't know if she has an end game in that sense. I think she's just kind of we're going along with her as she does this. That's just my impression. I don't know what your take is on that.
I think that's really insightful. And I guess I must confess, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I see people all the time. They'll send me their stuff about polygamy, how they've written up this big thing. And I look at it and I go, all of this material are in my book and in Todd Compton's book, but they wrote it up as part of their faith journey and their discovery process. And they apparently didn't consult all of the available sources. So they think it's new to everybody when it was really just new to them. And that may be it. And Steve, I appreciate your coming at this from the position of an evangelical, but let me just point out that I think we in the church have to be kind of careful, because there's a scripture that Joseph Smith dictated. It says that if we should labor all our days crying repentance and bring only one soul, how great will be our joy with them in Heavenly Father's kingdom. But I think the inverse of this could be true as well. And that's why when we go public with our beliefs, if any of them could hurt faith, how great will be our sorrow with them in the future. I think it flips the other way. When we assume the role of an alternate voice, and Elder Oaks has given a big talk on that, 3 decades ago. But and Michelle is an alternate voice. Brian Hales is an alternate voice. We just have to be careful, because if these beliefs we embrace are true, then anything we do to hurt the faith or to help the faith of somebody else is something that could come back to us with a reward, positive or negative. So that's an observation I just make for all of us, myself included, when we start becoming general authorities without having the call, meaning we teach generally to the membership of the church.
That's a conundrum that your people are dealing with. In our freewheeling evangelical world, like I can go to any church I want anytime I want. Well, I did go this past Sunday. I went to Sacrament and attended the elders quorum. So I do, and I gave a sermon a couple of years ago to the Community of Christ. So I do plenty of rest, and of course I go to the Bickertonites all the time. Them's my homies, right? But I do feel like as an outsider watching this, I'm seeing it, and the unique perspective I have is that I literally get to talk to those people who are watching Michelle's program, and go on Zoom calls with them and see where they're going. And again, I want to be very sensitive here, because these are lovely, wonderful people.
Yeah.
Many of them are kind of in a faith transition because of some of this stuff. And look, I'm not going to go and say Michelle's trying to undermine the church or anything like this. I'm just telling you the stories I'm hearing. And you have to understand, people reach out to me. Why? Because I'm an outsider and they feel I'm a safe space. They can talk these things through with me. Okay. So that's what I do. I literally, folks, I will spend hour and a half, 2 hours with people that will never be on our program, but we'll do a Zoom and we'll talk through this whole thing. And that's what we do. So everybody's at different places. So I want to be very sensitive to everybody, wherever they're at. I love you and care about you, and I'm not here to condemn you where you're coming from. I think you come with your perspective, but I think that Brian is making a valid point, that as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this conventionally, you're supposed to, I mean, the whole point of this is that being part of that organization is that you're supposed to, you're to follow prophet, and that's kind of the whole setup. That's the way it's been. So Michelle's kind of doing something different. And I just think and again, we also like to document here on this channel the history of the restoration, and Michelle is part of the story of the history of the restoration. So we need to acknowledge that as well.
That's interesting, because Todd Compton, who wrote In Sacred Loneliness, groundbreaking work, published, I think, in 1996. But he and I exchanged, because he came out with a second volume that's all of the documents. He transcribed all these documents, and I wrote a review for the Mormon History Journal of Mormon History. But he and I exchanged some emails because I had some questions about it, and I actually wrote an index for it, which took me many hours because they didn't include one. Signature Books, Barbara Jones Brown, and she and I had a conversation. She goes, "Hey, that's great. We'll include it." But the point was, he wrote me in one of the emails. He says, do you ever get the feeling that you're actually part of Mormon history, that we're making Mormon history as we're going along? And I hadn't really thought of it that way. But, the discussion of Joseph Smith and plural marriage certainly has a huge chapter on Todd Compton and all of his wonderful contributions to the topic. And then enter into the 2007, Don Bradley and myself working on. And now we've got all of the podcasts that Michelle has put together on this question. And Steve, I hope I'm not being insensitive to these people either. I want you to understand, I don't like polygamy. It's unfair. Men can do it, women can't. Yep. But Abraham did it, Jacob did it. No matter how many words we want to throw at that, Abraham was a friend of God, and the Bible doesn't condone it, but it doesn't condemn it either. So It's just kind of there in the Bible. And I don't like it. It fractures the foundation of intimacy, of exclusivity, that a monogamous couple share things that make their marriage something special. And if you bring in a second spouse, regardless of gender and all of that kind of thing, you fracture that exclusivity that they share. And I just don't know how it could work here on earth. My heart goes out to people who try to live it as a religious principle in Utah, in Nauvoo. I don't like it. It sounds like it would be awful in this life to do this.
I also want to clarify, I have a lot of people who practice the principle that are very good friends. As a matter of fact, I literally had one person come to my Christian community last year with his newly married spouse that met her. And so I want to also say, we're not going to be bashing on you people who do practice the principle as well. And you bring that to the table. I also have to say that many of the people that do practice the principle are delightful human beings.
Oh, and yeah.
They're wonderful.
Fantastic.
So I want to say that I want to acknowledge that too. So these are good people. Let's just put it out there, Brian. These conversations that are happening amongst all these different groups, most of these people are good, well-meaning, earnest people. And I think really we have to acknowledge the humanity of each individual and where they're coming from. Different opinion, that's fine. Just acknowledge that they're all fellow image bearers and treat them accordingly. Now, if I had my way, if I wanted to, as an evangelical, I mean, I love Joseph Smith. I went on Mormon Stories and said, the very last episode, we did 5 episodes, and the final episode, we waited to the very end, was how Mormonism saved an evangelical's life. So I'm indebted to the Book of Mormon and to Joseph Smith. And if I, as an evangelical, would, because I'm so also trying to build bridges with the evangelical world and the Restoration, and if I could find a way to extricate Joseph Smith from polygamy, boy, that would make it a lot easier for me to be able to make Joseph and the Book of Mormon accessible. Primitive Mormonism, all that would be much more accessible to evangelicals. And again, I can argue that at the very beginning, polygamy wasn't practiced. So you could say that primitive Mormonism doesn't have polygamy, right? 1830 Mormonism, which is evangelical Christians, it's a born-again, spirit-filled evangelical Christians that were there on April 6, 1830. Them's my people, like I like to say. So the earliest, I would say, the early Joseph Smith wasn't a polygamist. The doctrine does develop that way. So I want to get that all out there, and then maybe add anything on, and then we can return back to the slideshow.
No, I think that's kind of what the RLDS Community of Christ Church has tried to do, is to just kind of stay with the Book of Mormon version. You know, William Law broke with Joseph Smith and published the Nauvoo Expositor. He also, at the same time, established his own church that still believed in the Book of Mormon,
right,
as verily true. Joseph wasn't a false prophet; he was a fallen prophet. And that's because they found so much good in the Book of Mormon and in that early version of Mormonism. And be that as it may, if you follow Joseph further along, to me it's obvious that eternal marriage included at that time the practice of plural marriage, and Joseph engaged and introduced it. The polygamy is not a higher law in my view. It's just a difficult practice that's part of the higher law, which is eternal marriage. But that's another discussion point. I have one more concern that if we're ready to transition over to my first concern is where is Michelle going with all of this? And is she concerned that there might be confusion and what that might do to individual faith? The second concern, I'll share this screen, although it's only got 4 or 5 words on it, is transparency in the documentation. And this is a slide I made yesterday. I've made up a word, or maybe I borrowed it from somebody and I can't remember who, but people call me an apologist, and I get it. But I wish they'd call me a transparencyist. And that's a person who wants to be transparent with the data, with the documents, with the manuscripts. And what a transparencyist does is he or she will present all of the evidence to the audience. They will interpret it. They're entitled to do so because they work to get all the evidence together, okay? But they allow the audience to decide for themselves, okay? They just throw it all out there. And these are what Don Bradley, who was my research assistant during 2007 to 2009, and I hired him, sent him out. He got all kinds of documents, but we were trying to do just this. We wanted to put together volumes where all of the documents were there. And I think we did pretty well. Since our books were published 10 years ago, there's a handful of things that have come out that I would have included, some of which weren't even available, like DNA studies and things. But we were able to be pretty comprehensive, and my 3 volumes have been criticized. But one of the criticisms I haven't heard is that we left things out, and we tried not to. It didn't matter where it came from, anti-Mormon, believer, everything we tried to either quote or reference in these volumes. So I can tell you, whether I am a transparencyist or not, I'm trying to be. And I uploaded all of my documents, everything that I used to write my 3 volumes, I uploaded to a website. And Fair Mormon, now they're called Fair, but they came to me in like 2015 and said, Brian, do you want to upload all of your data to our website? And I thought, wow, sure, let's do it. Let's just put it out there. Let people download what they want. And I've since moved it over to my own website. It's MormonPolygamyDocuments.org. But if you want to see primary documents, you can go there. You'll see everything. So I'm just making a plea that I'm trying to be a transparencyist here. And I'm sorry, you're sitting here just staring at this screen. I should have come off of it. But at the other end of this spectrum is the propagandist. Mm-hmm. And a propagandist is very selective in the evidence that they present. they want to convince the audience to agree with them, and they will use emotion and persuasive speech. Now, I'm not saying that's Michelle Brady Stone, but somewhere on this spectrum is every presenter. And I'm trying to be a transparencyist, and I hope she is too. But I'm going to give you a couple of examples here that cause me concern. This is why I came up with this concern. And these are from that very same video cast that we've been using before.
There are two things you need to know about Section 132. The first time it was ever heard was 8 years after Joseph Smith was murdered. At a special conference in Utah in 1852, Brigham Young magically pulled it out of his desk where he claimed it had been locked away safely.
Okay, a couple of things. The first time it was presented is kind of ambiguous, presented to who and in what kind of a setting, but she says it was magically pulled out of his desk. And I have some trouble with that language. And I know Michelle knows better because we've talked about it and it's in my book. Let me just provide a little more context so that we really don't think that this came through the process of magic or that it didn't occur before that Brigham Young pulled it out of his desk. In Joseph Smith's journal, he says, for the date of July 12, 1843, received a revelation in the office in the presence of Hiram and William Clayton. And then if we go to William Clayton's journal, it says, this AM I wrote a revelation consisting of 10 pages talking about many wives and concubines. So there is a revelation. There's two contemporaneous sources for a revelation from Joseph Smith on polygamy. And then we have several other eyewitnesses. There was a copy made. Joseph Kingsbury testified to that. William Clayton said the copy was perfect. And I'm not trying to go through this. I didn't want to go point for point, but this is one that I just want to provide. This provenance is pretty solid, and I know Michelle's taken issue with something here, and I didn't go through it, but the provenance of where Section 132 came from is really quite solid. And we even have the document today. It was given to Brigham Young in 1847 here. And that's when he had finally got a desk in Utah. He probably put it in there with other important things. And that's probably how it got in there. And it really wasn't from magic. And here it is. It's written in Joseph Kingsbury's hand. You can see there's very little editing that is evident on it. It hasn't been changed, hasn't been rewritten. And on the topic of it was first presented, really the first time it was presented to a group was a month after it was written. It was presented to the Nauvoo High Council, and we have 6 eyewitnesses who left the record that they heard him presented there. And then I have a whole chapter showing how once it was written in Nauvoo, people became aware of it. And so that chapter talks about testimonies and records from these individuals. And so this is I'm just concerned about transparency here. I don't think Michelle is being transparent. The record didn't come magically, and I think she knows this, that she's had other episodes about its origin, and she may disagree with what I have just said, and yet most of these things are well documented. I don't know what we do with a document. If we don't like it, we shouldn't ignore it. That's where the transparency theme comes in. Let's be transparent. Let's tell our audience, yeah, we have this evidence. I don't think that it tells the right story. Here's my story, and here's why I believe that. That's okay. That's transparent. But to not tell people what happened, to use words like magic, implies things that I think are not totally accurate.
So I wanted to ask you, did you attend Sunstone last summer?
I haven't been to Sunstone in a few years.
Because it was interesting, because Radio Free Mormon gave a presentation talking about how there's echoes of Section 132 in the Nauvoo Expositor. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make sense that Brigham Young, if they were making this out of whole cloth, they would say, okay, let's take the phraseology from the Nauvoo Expositor and put that in Section 132. Right. So it does, there's echoes of it, and he even shows it phrases and words that are talked about. So it appears that these accusations made were based on knowledge of Section 132. And I thought that was an interesting thing that he brought to the table as well. So it begs the question, like, why would Brigham Young, if this was made up, why would they be echoing the Nauvoo Expositor? It doesn't make any sense in that sense. What do you think about that?
Again, I appreciate Radio Free Mormon And who is it there? I've talked to him, but I don't know his name. Do you know who is that? That's not Bill Reel, right? That's
Oh, no. I will not divulge his
oh,
name.
you won't tell his name. Okay, maybe that's why I don't know it. Okay, I got that. But I've emailed or something with them, but transparency. See, I applaud that. Let's just get the data out there, and let's not just withhold things or misrepresent things. That causes me concern. Let me share one last example here. Let's see, share screen.
Even more interesting, before the new 1880 edition, the Doctrine and Covenants included the original section 101. It was listed by Roman numeral CI, which, like every other scripture Joseph Smith ever brought forth and everything he ever said or wrote on the topic, adamantly denied and forbid polygamy. Inasmuch as this church has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe one man should have one wife and one woman but one husband.
Okay. One thing that I'm pretty sure Michelle was aware of is that this particular phrase doesn't say exactly what she said that it says. It doesn't condemn polygamy. And let me explain why. Let's go to this slide. Back in 1902, Joseph Smith III, and he was president of the RLDS Church, he was having an exchange in the national magazine called The Arena. And he would write a letter, and then President Joseph F. Smith, who's his cousin. See, Joseph Smith III was born in 1832. And Joseph F. Smith was born in 1834. So they're just 2 years apart. They lived together in Nauvoo, and they knew each other, and they're cousins. So you can imagine there's this whole extra family dynamic going on here, which is kind of fun to think about. But he had made the very same type of claim as Michelle just made, that section CI in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants would condemn polygamy. And here's what Joseph F. Smith wrote. He said, the declaration that one man should have one wife and that one woman but one husband bears the implication that a man might possibly be permitted at some time to have more than one wife, while a woman was to have but one husband. So that's a little confusing. Let's go back to the screen here with what is being from the Revelation CI of the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Yeah. I see what
so
you're saying.
can you see my arrow? Does it
Yep.
show up? Good. It says, we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife and one woman but one husband.
Mm-hmm.
And what people are assuming are two things. One, we notice it says the crime of fornication. Now, it's not crimes of fornication and polygamy. It's the crime of fornication. And then polygamy is just mentioned as a separate thing. It's not a crime in this context. But then it also says that one man should have one wife. That is not saying the same thing as one man should have only one wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Joseph F. Smith is saying, that this is ambiguous. One man should have at least one wife, or one man should have only one wife, are two readings of this. And any linguist will tell you that this is ambiguous. Now, we can scoff, we can roll our eyes, we can say this is the technicality, but this is how President Joseph F. Smith read it. And I would encourage us all not to make claims that Section CI condemns polygamy or is specific to monogamy, because the actual language is ambiguous, and that is how it was read by the church president in 1902. So, Stephen, this brings us back to this slide again, just hoping that we can all be transparencyists. And there's a lot of things I don't know, but I'm pretty familiar with the documents surrounding this topic of Joseph Smith and plural marriage. And there are a lot of documents that need to be dealt with. And this is a slide I made a while ago, and I'll just throw it up there. But this is a list of people who left statements directly regarding Joseph Smith's involvement with plural marriage. And then we have others, of course, that could be brought in. So just to recapitulate, what is the objective of her podcast or webcast? And then can we strive for transparency in the documentations, these are really the two concerns. And I really appreciate you letting me come on your show and just share these concerns. I don't know where this is going to go. I'm glad that you're talking to Michelle and she can respond. And she's got 17,000 followers. So, you know, this opens up a lot of possibilities here. And I hope that it doesn't get too exciting, and maybe it won't be exciting at all, but it's a good dialogue, good conversation to have.
Anytime we talk about polygamy, it's always going to get exciting, Brian. That's an understatement. Did you have any more slides, or was that pretty much everything that you wanted to put out?
That's pretty much
Okay.
the two concerns that I wanted to share.
Okay, Brandon, first of all, I want to thank you very much. I called you last week about this and just said, hey, I'd love to have you come on because, a lot of very close friends, a lot of followers of mine have been bringing her up. And, I talked with Michelle over a year ago. And so I've had off again conversations with her and talked about her coming on the program. And then just after she put that video out a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of chatter about it, I thought, okay, I need to revisit this. And, just so you know, folks, I'm not a big polygamy guy. Like there's certain areas of Mormon history that are more interesting to me than others. And polygamy's been one of those areas that always I was very sensitive about, for me personally, because of my kind of my kinship that I have with Joseph Smith. I always go and just say, oh, Joseph, oh man, why'd you do it? It's like, that's kind of how I feel. I feel like it's a tragedy in my mind, just, and again, this is an outsider. I'm not condemning people who practice the principle, by the way. Okay. Because it's arguably, it is biblical. So I can't condemn you for doing something that Abraham did, right? In one sense, but I do feel like that's an area that's always been a weak point, kind of a blind spot for me. The temple stuff never really intrigued me because I never made a big deal about the temple stuff. And I'll tell you why. I said, in the 19th century, there are millions of evangelicals who were doing similar temple rites in Masonic halls. So why would I? And to this day, there are probably more Southern Baptists doing Masonic rituals in America than there are Latter-day Saints doing temple endowments. So why as an evangelical would I go after them for that? Right? That never made any sense to me. So I never got scandalized by these things necessarily. There's aspects of things that rituals that were done in the temple in the past. We won't get into that, but I do bother me a little bit, but they've since made reforms in that area. And the other was the massacres, like Mountain Meadows and Hans Mills. These are areas that's another area of mine that just really hurts me so much. One, what my people did to your people in Hans Mills, and what your people did to my people in Mountain Meadows. It's really hurts me a lot, So it really brings up a lot of wounds for me. So those are the three areas that I kind of push to the side. But I really feel like I can't do that anymore. And I really felt like, okay, it's important that we do have this conversation here on Mormon Book Reviews. Now, I've had polygamists on. Benjamin Schaefer's been on many times. I've taped some stuff with him that we're going to be releasing. So we do have conversation. I had probably the last interview ever of Ann Wild was on my program. I love Ogden Kraut. Ogden Kraut was an awesome dude. I mean, he was good. He was like best friends with Gerald Tanner. Oh boy, I would have loved to have sat in that room and listened to those two guys talk, right?
Me too, actually.
Yeah, wouldn't that have been something? And then, of course, we've had many people from. We've done a lot of polygamy on this channel, but we've never done the issue that we talked about today, whether or not Joseph Smith either one instituted polygamy, two practiced polygamy, and then there's this counter thing that a lot of these people say that Joseph Smith was against polygamy from the very beginning and fought it. That's kind of what the position that they're taking. And I never really explored those topics here on MBR, but I felt it's time to start now. So Brian, before was there anything else you wanted to talk about? Because I know this is it's been a little over a year now since you were on Michelle's program, and you caught a lot of flack from certain corners for coming on there. Some people were saying you basically went on her channel and say, no, ma'am, that's not history. And maybe talk a little bit about some of the criticisms that people made about you last year. Maybe speak to that a little bit. Maybe clear the air on a few things on that too.
Well, we were talking off mic, and you said that she and I had a clash or something on her video cast that I did last year, and I didn't remember it that way. I remember that I had used a slide and I had used her profile picture, and in that picture she was with her baby, and I just pulled it off of the YouTube profile, but that made her feel bad because I guess the baby had passed away, and I didn't know that. But I thought if somebody used a profile picture that I'd be okay using that on a slide, and apparently I wasn't. That was the only exchange that I thought I apologized profusely, and then we moved on. And the only other thing I remember from it is that I just stopped talking about the last third because it was her time to tell her feelings, like you said, maybe her faith journey or something. But I refrained from really going point by point for the latter third. So I know there were a lot of people afterwards who thought I had done poorly. You know, ironically, a member of my stake presidency listened to it and thought it was great. So he was very complimentary. And I don't know if he's checking up on me or not. You know, I haven't had to worry about local leaders before, and he's a dear friend actually now. But at the time, we didn't know each other very well. So I have to confess, I realize people are very energized by this topic, and understandably so. Sex and religion are red button topics, no matter where or when we're talking. And then you throw it into Joseph Smith, who we love, and I love just as you do. And I wish he hadn't had to do it. See, my version of Joseph Smith is a guy who didn't want to do it. This angel that he reported coming 3 times, and he first came in 1834, according to the accounts, and then came a 3rd time. The last time he's got a sword. It's not a flaming sword, but it's a sword saying, Joseph, we really want you to do this. The reason in my mind, the Joseph Smith I believe in, is because Joseph didn't want to do it. He didn't want to hurt Emma. And if you look at the timeline, the marriages before that 3rd visit, he's being sealed to for eternity, I believe, non-sexual, for eternity sealings to legally married women that wouldn't have sexuality. And then you see this angel coming according to his timeline. And then after that is when we find him being married to single women and consummating those marriages as far as the sexuality issue goes. So for me, it's a Joseph Smith that hasn't got a lot of press, but it's the one that I believe in, who didn't want to do it. But once the angel came the 3rd time, he said, okay, God wants me to do this, so I'm jumping in. And Emma did accept it for a short bit, a very short bit. But she died totally believing in Joseph as a prophet. And she was a polygamy insider. She knew. And I can see I'm starting to get testimonial here. I'm sorry here, Steve, but the way I see Joseph is that, yeah, he didn't want to do it, but then he did it like Joseph did everything once he started. And this would have been in about April, May of 1842. And then, but even those that were closest to him, even William Law, who heard about polygamy from Joseph, he took home the revelation. He said it turned us upside down. And then he turned from Joseph, he broke away. But his journal entry for January 1st, 1844 indicates that Law saw what Joseph was doing and almost participated. And Law was a discerning guy. And if Joseph were just marrying women for sex, Law would have seen through that in a second. But he took several weeks and months to decide, I don't think this is really religious. And so Joseph, whatever he introduced, it was in a religious context that a lot of people took as a religious practice, almost getting William Law. But even after Law left, he embraced the Book of Mormon. He didn't just say Joseph is just a fraud from the beginning or anything like this. So I wish we could get a little more press on the Joseph Smith who's having to be visited 3 times by an angel and persuaded to do this, because Joseph didn't want to. That wasn't what he wanted to do.
It's an interesting way to look at it. You know, you're going from a faithful perspective. There were those who would push back on that narrative, but I think it's important that you bring that to the table. Now, I actually want to, I have another question, but before I go to that, you said it wasn't a flaming sword. Why do you say it wasn't a flaming sword?
Well, I wrote an article on that a few years ago. I've collected 22 different accounts from 9 individuals who knew Joseph Smith personally, and they all refer to an angel with a sword. Now, a couple of them may actually be secondary. We don't know for sure. Like Eliza Snow may have been quoting her brother Lorenzo, or she may have been quoting Joseph. We know she was close to Joseph. But the reason I say that is all of the accounts, except one, do not mention a flaming sword. And the only one is attributed to Eliza R. Snow, but it's printed by a non-Latter-day Saint in an Eastern newspaper.
Okay, and you know,
it's the only one.
First of all, I'm glad you brought that up, because it actually, I think you can see how the idea of a flaming sword would get conflated with an angel, because it goes back to the Garden of Eden, where the angels had a flaming sword, Garden of Eden. You can almost see even an outsider adding a flaming sword just because, well, they had a flaming sword at Eden. So that's very fascinating. I'm glad you that's a very interesting perspective. But I can easily see how an evangelical or an outsider or somebody's Bible-based adding flaming sword, because it almost like, well, of course it's going to be flaming sword because it's an angel, you know, with the swords. Well, they had a flaming sword in the Bible. So thank you. That's really good. That's not an insight I never thought of before. Then I think you brought this up years ago, and it may have been, I think I may have even heard it on your interview with Rick Ben on Gospel Tangents, if I'm not mistaken, because I've used this argument. I've actually I've talked to Latter-day Saints about this, and I think it's from you, and that is that Joseph had intended to eventually seal everybody in the church, right? All together, that the whole church would be sealed together. Was that something that you did? Something you said that was his intent? That was the direction he was heading.
You know, it would be another person. I don't believe that,
Okay.
except that he talked about being sealed together in a chain. Joseph Smith described two kinds of sealing. Parents could be sealed, children could be sealed to parents, and husbands and wives could be sealed. And to be part of the church of the firstborn, we have to be sealed into a chain that eventually goes back to Adam. But that's the only kind of sealing that I have ever discussed or talked about. So,
well, I don't know if I've heard somebody else say it, or maybe I kind of in my mind thought I heard you say something, that the idea was, and so this is the idea, is that eventually what Joseph was doing, eventually he would have, all the members of the Church of Jesus Christ would have all been sealed together. And that was the direction he was heading. I don't know if that, maybe I may misheard you say that, or heard it from somewhere else, but I just think it's an interesting to see where the evolution would have been going. It's an interesting speculation, I guess, to say the least, which is.
Well, I don't think it's wrong. I think absolutely Joseph wanted everybody in the church sealed, either, but it's through genealogical lines, or parents to children and parents, and husbands and wives all sealed together. Everybody in the church needs to be sealed in that. So what you said is not incorrect.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be sealed to Joe Schmo over here, because I'd have to either be his child or his father or spouse. That's the only way I could be sealed.
Okay.
There were no other sealing ordinances that bound people together.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's great. Good. Thanks for your clarification. I'll have to see where I got that idea from. Maybe it's one of those little things that I just made up in my own mind. I don't remember anymore. It's been years since I watched those interviews. So Brian, this was a great conversation we had today. And again, Michelle, I want to reach out to you. First of all, thank you for taking my call yesterday. I know you're a busy person. I know what it's like as well. My phone dings all the time. And it was a gracious conversation. I've always had very positive relations with Michelle. She actually had lunch a couple months ago with my frequent co-host, Rebecca Biblioteca, and went on her podcast, Mormonish. And so I feel like we have a good rapport. And I feel that Michelle, I hope that you feel that this is a safe space that you can come onto and tell your story and make your case. And basically, I'm going to let you choose how you want to do it. So if you want to come on and just do a one-on-one and do like a slide presentation like you did with Brian, that's one thing. Or if you want to have Brian come back and we could help facilitate a conversation, I think that'd be a really cool thing to do. Or maybe we could do both. But either way, folks, Brian, thanks for coming on the program. You're an awesome human being.
Well, thank you. And Steve, I want to make one other comment. You've mentioned how you're able to move in all kinds of different restoration circles. Being an evangelical, and a lot of that, you need to take some credit for that. I hope you won't edit this out, but your personality is remarkable, and we are grateful for your willingness to look at the restoration and to give an opportunity for us to share what we believe are the truths that can be helpful to your audience, and the kindness that you show to all of us, and the lack of judgment, and the charity that we feel from you. Thank you for that.
Well, Brian, I have to say thank you for those kind words. That means a lot. And you know, it does mean a lot, because sometimes in this, I can be greeted with a lot of hostility in a lot of quarters. And we talked about that off camera. So I'm always grateful for when people reach out to say kind words. And so thank you for honoring me, Brian. It's a real privilege. This is a privileged space that I occupy. I do recognize the uniqueness of what we're doing here at Mormon Book Reviews. That really does position us in a very unique space. And again, Michelle, I can't wait to have you on. It'd be great to finally have you on my program. I think that it's overdue to have Michelle. 132 reasons. Come on. Looking forward to it. Folks, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this conversation we had? You know, I have many people who are followers of different branches of the Restoration that say that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, and that's their position. I want to hear from you. And I want to hear from those of you who practice the principle. And I want to hear from those of you who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who do believe that Joseph Smith did practice polygamy, and those who don't. I want to hear all the voices. So there are links in the description. Brian, I'd like for you to send me a link for your website that has all your information on there that we can share with the audience. And we're going to keep the conversation going. So we have also in the description, if you want to financially support the channel, there are links in the description there as well. And again, I want to thank everybody who is financially supporting the channel. Could not do it without you. I'm very excited to be getting out to Utah next month. I will be speaking at Rod Meldrum's Firm Foundation Thursday, 7 p.m. primetime slot. Going to talk a Protestant defense of the Book of Mormon. Also on April 17th, we will probably have a meetup somewhere in the Valley. So for those of you who want to have a more intimate affair, we usually get about 20 to 30 people for my meetups. So it's a little smaller venue. So you'll at least be able to spend a few minutes with me. And I try to talk to everybody. Trust me. It's really important that I look you face to face. Don't be nervous to come. You know, I even had people who came to my meetups who sat at another table. They were afraid to approach me, and they finally worked up the courage to come and introduce themselves. And guess what? They ended up being a guest on my show 2 times. That's what happens here at Mormon Book Review. So remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.